9 years ago, at the age of 38, I went through a divorce from my husband Nick, who was 40 at the time. We had been married for 3 years, and he had been a good husband until a significant misunderstanding led him to leave me. Within days, he served me with divorce papers without giving me an opportunity to explain the truth. Hurt and bewildered, I didn't contest the divorce. I simply let him go. I used to be a housewife, and on one fateful day, Nick unexpectedly walked in to find my ex-boyfriend Joe, also 38, at the house with me. The three of us knew each other from college, and Joe and I had dated for only 3 months before I realized my true feelings for Nick. Joe had come over to invite us to his upcoming wedding in a few months. Nothing suspicious was happening. However, Nick assumed the worst, left without a word, and even blocked all communication channels. Despite my attempts to explain and reach out, Nick drove away and cut off all contact. Devastated, I spent the next 2 days in a state of panic and tears. Joe also tried to explain, but even he was blocked. I believed Nick's anger would subside, and he would return, allowing me to clarify everything. Unfortunately, that never happened, and a few days later, Nick filed for divorce. Feeling helpless, I decided not to fight for my marriage, and as the divorce proceedings began, I moved in with a friend until I could establish my independence. It took time, but I eventually got my life back on track, securing a job and moving into my own apartment. Though angry and hurt by Nick's actions, I chose to focus on rebuilding my life. Even after the divorce was finalized, I was content with the little I gained from it. I attended Joe's wedding, reconnecting with college friends, while Nick remained absent as expected. Life took an unexpected turn when I met Chris, a 40-year-old man, at the wedding. Although sparks flew, I held back due to my recent divorce. We exchanged numbers, but didn't connect for a while. A year later, in a better mental state, I encountered Chris again at a work event. 2 years into dating, we got married, and another year later, we welcomed our daughter. Now, almost 5 years since my divorce from Nick, I've evolved into a new person. Despite moving on, I was recently shocked when Nick, after all these years, appeared at my doorstep, unannounced a few days ago. The impact of his unexpected return still lingers, leaving me in a state of disbelief. I never figured out how he managed to locate me, and truth be told, I didn't bother investigating later on. It was a weekend, and my husband and I were both home with our daughter when the doorbell unexpectedly rang. My astonishment peaked when I opened the door to find Nick standing there, holding a bouquet of roses and smiling as if the past 9 years hadn't happened. Before I could fully process the surreal situation, he began explaining that a few weeks ago, he learned from a friend that Joe was married to someone else, not me. He claimed to have realized he had overreacted back then and wanted a second chance, asking for forgiveness. I was at a loss for words. The absurdity of him divorcing me over a misunderstanding years ago, without seeking the truth, was baffling. Now, after 9 years of silence, he believed he could waltz back into my life and ask for a second chance, the very thing he had denied me back then. Fat chance. While he continued talking, I stared at him in silence, contemplating my next move. I wanted to slam the door in his face, but that wouldn't suffice. So, opting for a more impactful response, I instructed him to wait and return to the living room where my husband and daughter were waiting. Without time for explanations, I scooped up my daughter, motioned for Chris to follow, and headed back to the front door. You can imagine the scene that unfolded. Nick was visibly horrified as I approached him with my daughter in my arms and my husband behind me. I smiled and informed him that he was a bit too late to request a second chance now, asking him to leave. After a brief moment of silence, he turned and hastily retreated to his car without uttering another word. Satisfied with my actions, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for years. Once he was gone, I sat Chris down, recounted the encounter with Nick, and we shared a good laugh over the audacity of his belief that I would take him back without question after what he had done to me 9 years ago. I couldn't fathom why he thought it was a good idea to spring this surprise on me without doing any research first. A glance at any of my social media accounts would have revealed that I was now married with a daughter. However, I suppose he couldn't access them due to my privacy settings. Even then, he couldn't have reached out to our old friends to find out what I was up to. Chris believes he's so self-centered that he assumed I would have waited around for him after he left, hoping that he'd come back someday. It sounds like a pretty accurate assessment of his character, even though Chris has never conversed with Nick. It's been a few days since the encounter, and I hoped he would leave me alone. Yet this morning, he messaged me on Facebook from a new account, expressing how hurt he was by my actions. He claimed he genuinely wanted to apologize for the past, but felt I had made a mockery of the situation. He still feels remorse for his past actions, but believes I owe him an apology for trying to humiliate him. AITA for what I did to Nick. Update 1. I decided not to respond to Nick's message. He didn't deserve even an ounce of my sympathy or forgiveness, let alone an apology. My husband was right. Nick assumed I'd still be waiting for him and would readily accept him once he was ready to come back. He had always been self-centered, a trait I had overlooked before marrying him. There were red flags I ignored, like his discomfort with me being around other guys, even just as friends. He convinced me to quit my job and be a housewife, claiming he didn't trust anyone else to take care of our home. Despite sacrificing for him, he didn't give me a chance to explain during the divorce. I always felt Nick was excessively jealous of Joe, my first boyfriend in college. Despite being loyal, he never trusted me. After our divorce, it took me a long time to recover and give love a second chance. Some say I jumped from one relationship to another too quickly, and perhaps it's true. However, I'm glad I took that leap of faith because now I have the best husband and a beautiful daughter. I won't apologize to Nick, but I do owe him thanks. If he hadn't left me, I might still be stuck in an unhappy marriage. Update 2. I discovered a couple more details about Nick. It turns out he had deleted all his social media, and for the past few years, he had been living and working in Seoul. Consequently, he lost touch with old friends, including those from college. He returned just a month ago, got in touch with a friend who knew about Joe's marriage but not mine, and that's how he ended up on my doorstep. It's still strange that he chose to approach me after almost a decade of no contact, but I've moved on from it. He hasn't messaged me since I ignored his last message, and I doubt he will. I also informed Joe about the incident, and he was just as shocked at Nick's audacity. My daughter asked about the man, but I didn't disclose the truth, stating he had the wrong address, which satisfied her curiosity. I don't plan on telling her unless she discovers it on her own, which seems unlikely. Update 3. After almost a week of no contact, Nick texted me again. I had forgotten to block him, which was my oversight, but I'm busy with work and not dwelling on it. In the text, he expressed a desire to meet, claiming he doesn't mind my husband and daughter and still wants to give our relationship another shot, insinuating that I'd be willing to cheat on my husband. This was ironic, considering he left me for that reason 9 years ago. I was disgusted by his text, blocked his number, and made it clear I wanted him to leave me alone. His delusional belief that I still have feelings for him is baffling, and I find his messages repulsive. Update 4. Some accusations suggest I'm still into Nick, which is not true. I hate him, and I believe it's a natural sentiment given our history. I shared the text with Chris because I value honesty in my marriage, and I would never jeopardize it by engaging in any such behavior. I love Chris more than anything and would never knowingly let Nick back into my life. I acknowledge my habit of not checking who's at the door when my husband is home, and I'm working on changing that. Nevertheless, I would never intentionally welcome Nick back into my life. I have no desire to have him back in my life, so it's disheartening that people are making such accusations. I hope this clarifies things. Update 5. Nick showed up again, but this time, I didn't open the door without checking first. Thankfully, my daughter was out with my husband. I was caught up with work, and when I realized it was Nick, I told him through the door that he needed to leave and wasn't welcome anymore. Despite my clear message, he refused to listen. He informed me he was in town for a couple more weeks before leaving.